Welcome back to Snap Publishing, those of you familiar with what we do here, and welcome those of you new to Snap Publishing, where we discuss the secrets of Edward Leeds Scanlon's Coral Castle and how it pertains to things biblical, to the periodic table of elements, and the graphic that I have constructed where we blend King Solomon's Temple, King David, King Solomon's Temple, with the biblical narrative and DNA, the double helix, and the zodiac according to Genesis chapter 49 in the Bible, and Jacob's 12 sons and one daughter. All right, so today is episode 3 of the first series. And what I wanted to cover in this episode is the most important graphic is the temple PDT, I call it, periodic table. In other words, King David and Solomon's temple, and why I designed it the way that I did. It has a strange east-west or north-south orientation to it. I chose to go with both directions at the same time, because that way there, it helps explain what we are dealing with today, which are the two giants that are most mentioned, which are Goliath and Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the metal man, and how that pertains to the layout in King Solomon's temple. So as not to confuse people, I want to go over why I did things the way that I did, why I laid the temple instruments out the way that I did, which are not according to the Bible record. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into a little of the Genesis 49 zodiac at the end. But the main bulk of today will be just going over that whole design and why I chose to do things the way that I did. Okay, so the two giants. Now you get into the book of Daniel, that touches on Nebuchadnezzar's dream, where Nebuchadnezzar has basically a nightmare. It woke him up from a dead sleep, cold sweats. And he called in all his wise men and astrologers and soothsayers. You say, what's a soothsayer? A soothsayer is somebody who, there, poor boy. In other words, astrologer, people that are into astrology. So when it says he called in his astronomers and soothsayers, what does that tell you? It tells you that this other group of people, they're not scientifically based. They're more emotionally based, okay? And when you get into the Adam versus Eve, patriarchy versus matriarchy, you begin to realize why these systems come about. And you'll notice a lot of women, or guys that are trying to get women, get into astrology. And astrology it's more of emotion-based, and it's based on things loosely in astronomy. But it's basically palm reading, and it's considered not a science. But there are instances where it appeared to have had an influence. So it has gained popularity throughout the centuries. It's not very, excuse me, it's not very old. If you read Robert Powell's book, he gets into exactly when it really became a thing. So you just have to realize that there's always a patriarchy, matriarchy aspect. And even in a tyrant, a real tyrannical man like Nebuchadnezzar, in his reign, okay, he relied on these things, and many have. Many of these patriarchal figures, King Saul, he started out appeasing they weren't called the church back in the day. You could call it the synagogue, but it was really the temple and the priests and the Levitical order. He started out his reign prosecuting anyone that was doing astrology and witchcraft or anything they deemed that wasn't up to snuff as far as Judaism. Based on the Abrahamic faith. So this gets brought out when King Saul goes to the witch at Endor. By the way, Endor is always your groin, okay? It's the door, the entrance way to the temple. That's why she was the witch of Endor. And I can get into where the term witch comes up several times in my work. One of them is the Witch of Agnesy. You might see the book around here behind me somewhere. And Edward Leeds Scanlon had this love interest, and he said her name was Agnes. And whether or not all this is true, I believe if you follow Mr. Russell's video, and I can get you a link to that video. It's a very well-made video. The man is a super intelligent guy. He is from Vermont, and he built a workshop, and he created Edward's instruments in his castle, and he did a lot of the things Edward did through conventional means. But in it, when he shows how the cam worked on the device, the spinning rotary switch, that is not an easy thing. Anyone who, like Henry Ford designing his motor, Mercedes, same thing. The biggest problems, Rudy Diesel. Rudy Diesel dominated his rival, who could not figure out the timing that you need. It's precise timing. If you're off by 1 degree either way, it will not work. And Rudy Diesel nailed the timing mechanism for when diesel compresses and fires. His rival did not do that. And when you look at that clover leaf, that 4-leaf clover pattern in that rotary switch of Mr. Russell's video, Edward may have been making up this character based on someone he knew. Like, this is not unusual. Like Norman Rockwell would paint paintings of people he knew in the community. And this woman, Agnes, may have been his love interest, but I believe what Agnes represented in the Sweet 16 is the fact that he cracked the timing mechanism on his device, that he finally got it to fire to where all his equipment would, the saw would saw, the drill would drill, the chipping hammer would chip. So anyway, I'm just going to throw that little sniglet out there. It may not be true, but I believe there's meat on that bone. So anyway, Nebuchadnezzar has these soothsayers. He has this nightmare, and he brings in all these people, and they can't help him. So he's ready to chop them up into pieces. He's so mad because he knows this is a life-changing event. And this is true with people. I'm not one of these people that looks at every one of my dreams, but dreams have been known to be very significant in the course of history. All right? You can look at the life of Abraham Lincoln. And there were people that had dreams before his assassination that explained things to him. He's not the only one. This has happened. Julius Caesar's wife supposedly had a very strong dream that they were stabbing Julius and his blood coming out. All his friends had chalices and they were drinking his blood. I believe that is the gist of the dream. And he called in one of his soothsayers and said, hey, my wife's losing her marbles. What is this dream? And the guy's like, because he knew about the conspiracy and he lied. He's like, oh my God, this woman's predicting what we've all been conspiring against. And he said, oh, great king, oh, Caesar. That's all. You're the life-giving force, and we're drinking from your wine, the wine of your, kind of like Jesus said, drink of my blood and eat of my bread, drink of my blood. He fed him one of those lines, and that appeased Caesar. Caesar should have taken things a lot more serious. But anyway, obviously, history proves. So he should have listened to his wife. And one of the very rare occasions where a man should have listened to his wife. I'm just throwing that out there. That didn't cost you any extra. So we get into Nebuchadnezzar having this nightmare, and he's ready to chop up all the wise men in the kingdom. So there's a big disturbance, and Daniel says to his main man, who was one of the bodyguards, he says, hey, what's going on? And he tells him, hey, the king's about to kill you and all your 3 friends. And he said, hey, go tell him, give me a little bit of time. So Daniel, you see, he's doing the same thing Joseph did to the butler and the baker and eventually Pharaoh. Okay? And what you need to realize about what Daniel is doing, now Daniel himself may not have even understood the magnitude of what he was about to do, or he may have been very well versed in what he was doing. Daniel, if you look at the beasts in the dream that Daniel had, where they were striving on the sea, that's the Mediterranean Sea. That represents your brain. So does the Temple of Solomon. The two halves are your two hemispheres. Okay, and when you hear about, oh, the angels that were holding back the winds, the angel that stood in the Euphrates, that's talking about north, south, east, and west. People take things in the Bible and they make it way harder to understand than they really are. So you hear about this angel that's standing in the Euphrates holding back whatever. It's in the book of Revelation. The Euphrates is the Atlantic Ocean. Okay? And this is one of the four forces. This is one of the four states of matter. This is one of the four cardinal points. It's that simple. People are making the keepers and the watchmen, they're making this into something just incredibly difficult to understand. Okay? Watchman is right here. Someone who knows the times. The WM is the Marco Rodin's 124875 pattern. BMW or Volkswagen is the same thing. You're saying the same stuff different ways. Okay? VW is the 369, that's the V, and the W is the 124, and if you do the M, that's the 875. Okay? It just comes up over and over and over again in the Bible. And people are like, oh my God, what's this mysterious group of people? Who are the keepers? Well, what did Cain say? Am I my brother's keeper? So Cain was, it was a rhetorical question to God. He was mouthing off to God. Because Cain represents hydrogen. Okay? And hydrogen in the book of Song of Songs, Song of Solomon says, others' fields have I kept, but mine own have I not kept. See the what do you call it? There's a double entendre. He's saying, I'm a keeper over here, but I'm not over here. That's hydrogen. It's pretty obvious. Okay? So once you realize who the keepers are, who the watchmen are, this stuff is not hard. Nebuchadnezzar's dream, if you follow Daniel's dream about these beasts, these mysterious beasts, and they do represent the nations that Israel had dealings with. The first one, it's the lion that is on all fours and he has wings and he stands up, his wings are removed, and he's given the heart of a man. And people are like, oh, that's Egypt. And no, that's more than Egypt. This comes up over and over and over again. And that is why I chose to draw the temple the way I did. So that things that are on the east side are in the west side, and things that are in the west, and both, I got the lamp that is only on the south side, and the shewbread table is on the north side. I got them on both sides. Why did he do that? To show you this. You're looking at one of these, okay? And you have to stay fluid. If you don't stay laminar, you're going to be all chaotic, okay? You're just going to go totally into chaos, and this is the mindset of most Christians and people of the Judaistic faith. They are a mess. They just have no idea. And these Luciferians that crept into all of our school systems love that. They don't ever want you to be able to go 2 + 2 is 4, 4 + 4 is 8, 8 and 8 is 16. Very simple, easy beans. They want you all over the place. Okay? So you need to stay focused on very simple things. It always comes back to a 1 or a 0. Adam, Eve, God, devil. It's not hard. So that is what I had to crack through on my own skull. I'm like, man, I am so confused. I'm never going to figure this work out. And then once I realized, man, it always comes back to the 1 and the 0. And God's like, yeah, could have had a V8, huh, kid? That is how it's designed. And Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. Daniel has this dream. Daniel's dream is of this lion that has wings, stood to, stand on bipedal. Okay, went from being a quadruped to bipedal, had the wings removed. That is the Sphinx. Okay, but it represents, Nebuchadnezzar's dream represents the old world when Lucifer was a good guy. You gotta go back to when God and Lucifer were like when Adam and Eve were created. If you looked at God and Adam, you wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. Most theologians agree that he was a spitting image of God. Okay, so if you saw Jesus and Adam, it's that serious. Most theologians agree on that. The same thing could be said with Lucifer. Back before Lucifer fell, they were simpatico. They were best friends. And they were like father and son. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that is the case. That is what Luciferians teach. I am here to tell you that there's no connection between God the Father, Son, and Spirit and Lucifer or us. The only reason we are connected now is God chose carbon. And he's going to choose fluorine when the second coming occurs. Okay, look at my quotations. Okay? And people won't recognize God coming back in that form. Because every time God comes back, God is God of the future, not the past. They think, oh, he's going to come back like Jesus, right? We're going to recognize him. Not necessarily. All right? Well, he's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Yep, that is true. No matter how you slice it, what I just said still applies in that term. Think about it real hard. I'm going to leave that one right there. Okay? You got to read closely what God's saying. Like in the end, people say, oh, we're going to have no more this or that, wars, famine, sadness. So why do people come to God to dry their tears? If that's true, why are they crying? And he's, oh, they're there. Why is that happening? And by the way, the New Jerusalem specifically says it will not allow adulterers, people that practice witchcraft, liars, fornicators. Really? That's in the New Jerusalem? I thought that stuff was all done away with. No. So when God comes back as fluorine, okay, and carbon used to be the peacock, now it's the feather duster. Okay, God's moving on. God's God of the future. But he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Forever meaning the future. Okay? You guys better start waking up. All right? Because there's a lot more to that saying. And there are a few sayings in the Bible that you better pay attention to what it's actually saying. You know, I could easily say the drill instructors of Fort Benning, I don't call it whatever they're calling it today. I went to Fort Benning. And the Special Forces instructors, cadre, in John F. Kennedy Center for Special Warfare at Fort Bragg, oh, they'll dry away your tears. Yeah, they'll make you bury it 6 feet deep. And then dig it up to make sure it's still dead. They'll dry up your little tear. You understand? You better watch what God is saying, because there's no slack. And what applies to men, women, and kids get away with murder. So when you see, oh, God's being merciful over here, that's probably towards women and children. That don't apply to you as a guy. All right? That took me a long time to learn. And when you first start out, God's like, oh, there, you're a little baby. Oh, I'm going to nurse you off my boobie. But when you hit your teen years, you stop being a little wise guy. You stop being a little Jacob the supplanter. You're starting to get good, quoting the Bible, and you got your little sword out, and, you're like, stickety stick. I'm a fledgling Christian. Yeah, God's going to start going, oh, you want to play? So I'm just throwing those things out there. But this image Nebuchadnezzar has in this dream, the metal man, okay, head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, feet of iron and clay. This represents the system before Adam and Eve, the way the solar system was arranged, okay? Does it carry over to today? Yes, it does. That is why Egypt and Babylon, in that eagle with the wings plucked up, going from quadruped to bipedal, given the heart of a man, that is why they're together. Because the Babylonian system is the Egyptian system. This is another thing the Luciferians don't tell you. They hope you keep looking in Iraq for the Tower of Babel. Because the Tower of Babel and Babel is Egypt. And God has called Jerusalem Babylon. He said, you guys are acting just like, Nimrod and all the rest of them. You're supposed to be my holy people, and you're acting up. So God was getting mad. God was being very upset through the prophets. The prophets were schooling these kings that had turned away from God. And he was comparing Israel to Babylon. Okay, and then there's another place, mystical Babylon. Oh my God, where's mystical Babylon? You read about, oh, who's the Antichrist? Who's the Antichrist? There are many Antichrists. There are many Babylons and Babels, and there are mystical Babylon, right? You can say that is the BMW of Marco Rodin's 369-124-875. Okay? The Great Whore of Babylon, GWB. All right? The W and the B is also a V. All right? You look at the metal that's found in Genesis where it talks about the land of Havilah had this metal. It was called Velium. There's a B and a V together. Okay? So this comes up over and over in languages and other things, the BV connection. But really what it boils down to is you getting into the V, B, and an A. Okay, that's that compass and square you see. All right? That's the B and V. All right? It shows itself many different ways. Okay, you're taking a 369 pattern, that's one way, and then you're flipping it. Now you're making the Star of David. And this is that abused saying that they come up with, oh, as above, so below, which is complete bullshit. If you think about that saying, that's thrown around like it's logic, it's complete cockamamie craziness. And they get into that and abuse the living daylights. They're actually making excuses for living any way you want. They're saying, oh, as your brain, so your crotch. Skip the heart, man. Go right down to your dick and balls. Go right down to your vagina. That is what they're saying. Okay? That is wrong. Okay? It's supposed to be, as God does things in heaven, we are supposed to behave here on earth. Not as God is in heaven, guess what? Devil and God, they're the same person, so there's no difference between hell and heaven. None. Okay? And here on earth, yeah, we're just in this constant state of heaven and hell, and there's no difference between the two. Huh? Are you nuts? Go inside the crust of the earth. I want to see how that works out for you. You see how stupid that saying is? But no, people roll it around like it's not. It rolls right off their tongue these days. And these Luciferians are laughing their ass off. They're saying these people are sheep. They're imbeciles. Don't ever buy into that saying. That saying ends today. It's one of these things, like Jesus' cross. That is not Jesus. That is Lucifer. When are you going to wake up? That represents sin. Stop wearing a cross. Think about what you're doing. Okay? Same with these holidays. People like, oh, Christmas, it's not a pagan holiday. Yeah, they are all pagan holidays. You Luciferians never left. They had the front office. When Lucifer fell, they never went anywhere. It's like people say, today they're proving Jesse James never died. No, the Confederacy is still here. What about the Nazis? They never went anywhere. They went to South America and people left them alone down there. They're flourishing. They have these secret communities all over the planet. They're kept under, wraps. They're kept in check, but they're out doing Nazi stuff. The South here in America, there are radical Southern groups that despise, I'm a Yankee. I will never be an American to them. Okay? They are the pure Americans. And I could explain to them, hey, man, you better think about what you're doing. Because that whole KKK thing, that comes from the King of England. So you're actually following what the King of England wants. And that's why they had you kill Lincoln. They wanted to take America back. And you assisted them because you didn't understand your Bible that you believed in. You were deceived by the greatest deceivers that ever deceived anyone. So once you realize what you're doing, you wake up and go, man, this makes a lot of sense. Yeah. You're wearing that cross? Why do you think these Satanists will wear a cross? You see these rock and roll stars doing demonic stuff? They're saying this is Lucifer equals Jesus. Hydrogen 1 and hydrogen 2 are the same thing. Same with fluorines. They're all the same, man. No. Ends today. So when you see Nebuchadnezzar having this dream, Daniel having his dream, that Egypt Babylon thing, They're like this. They're so close together, unless you know how to divide, subdivide the fine minutia of Scripture, you're gonna just believe stupid stuff. So those beasts that were striving, there were 4. Okay, technically there's 5. Right? They say, oh, it was Egypt, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Rome was that real evil beast that stomped the earth with its feet and all that iron claws and fangs. Okay, they call it the nondescript beast. Okay, but what those actually represent, besides the 4 forces, the 4 states of matter, 4 rivers of Eden, ATGC, what those represent is the planet Earth and how the magnetic flux of this Earth was at different stages of Earth's development. So if you would have had vision that could see the magnetic flux coming out of the surface of the Earth, it's called the hairy coconut. It looks just like the surface of a coconut. And the crown where the swirl is, all right, babies have it up in the front, but that rear crown, okay, is like it's a whirl. And that comes up over and over in the Bible narrative. One of the things I point out in my version of the temple is the winding staircase where the priestly cells outside the temple. That represents what we were talking about earlier, the Witch of Agnesi, which is a type of curve. It's a mathematical curve. You have phi, which is a mathematical curve, okay? And there are curves that are based on pi, 3.14. There's curves that are based on phi. There's a whole study in mathematics about curves. This winding staircase represents what I'm talking about. Anytime you see a swirl or a winding staircase or something, pay attention. So these beasts represent the magnetic effect, the electromagnetic effect, or the magnetic flux of the Earth throughout the ages. This dream of Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold, is, people say, that's our sun. Hang on a sec. In the old world, that gold was pure gold. And this is why Daniel says, oh, Nebuchadnezzar, you are the greatest that ever was. And after you comes this inferior king. And he must have been like, oh, wow, I'm loving this dream. I love this guy. You know, Daniel was like aces with the king after that. Okay? But Daniel was talking out of both sides of his mouth because he understood. I believe Daniel knew. He's saying, okay, that pure gold was Lucifer before the fall. But today we call iron pyrite fool's gold. But technically brass is a type of fool's gold. So that head of gold is actually the same as Goliath's helmet of brass. I call it the hob. All right, because there's several things, and they come up over and over again. Hob, tob, and knob. Okay, and then the SOB is the sea of brass, the son of bitch. But these things kept coming up, and I'm like, this is that John Anthony West stuff that he noticed about the Greek Iliad. All right, well, that concludes our video for today. Thank you for tuning in. On the next series of videos, you probably won't see me as much. You'll hear my voice, and you'll see the graphics. And we'll go over each graphic in detail, and we'll illustrate to you so that you're able to follow along a lot easier than sitting here watching me. All right, thank you.